This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 841, recorded on Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. Science is still hot stuff. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight we will fill your heads with a spark, some smell-o-vision, and some more good news. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. You might not think about it often, but space is a really big cold place with occasional nuclear fireball. It has the odd gravity well capable of devouring nuclear fireballs. It's an insane place. And it's where you live, which is also insane because for the most part, pretty much everywhere that we know of is extremely hostile to life, which is what you are. But you, lucky you happen to live in the one place we know of where life can and does actually exist. And of the life forms on that one place where we know life can actually exist, you happen to be the most intelligent species. Now, what can you do with that? Quite a lot. Or very little at all. It's mostly up to you, which is pretty amazing for a tiny creature living on a wet rock in a universe of incomprehensible size. You still have a choice. In a universe where giant gravity wells can eat nuclear fireballs by the billions, you still have a choice. No matter what forces are swirling around you in the cosmic dust, no matter what the laws of nature happen to be inside the belly of a black hole, no matter what matter is ultimately composed of, you will always have a choice to determine your own future. And we are just happy you chose to hang out with us here on This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science.
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back. Another week. Many more science stories. Oh, we have so many fun stories. And I have to say, Blair, in my stories tonight, I am going to encroach on Blair's animal corner because I brought a lot of animals.
You know what? There's enough animals for the whole world to have its own corner. I'm happy to share.
Wonderful. Because I have cats, I've got ducks. I also have some hummingbirds, and we'll see what else goes in there. Justin, what did you bring?
I've got a NASA second chance. I've got at the end of the show, I'm going to have good news. Just good news segment. This time, I don't believe you. I think I've got it figured out now. I think I get the. I've also got some news on policing in America and the development of an artificial life form that can eat and poop, but it's not alive.
Not alive, but can eat and poop. Okay, yeah. Well, it's got the basics down right there. So it just needs a few more additions. Blair, what is in your animal corner?
I have leaping lizards and discerning dogs, and then before that, I have a non-animal story about a smelloscope.
Smelloscope. Well, this smells like it might be an amazing story. I can't wait to hear it. All right. We ready to jump in to all of the science fun?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do this. All right. Before we do so, I would like to remind you that if you are not yet subscribed to This Week in Science, you can find us all places that podcasts are found: Google, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, all sorts of places. You can also go to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. We are This Week in Science. We are also TWIS Science, TWISCIENCE. on the Instagram and Twitch and Twitter. You can just find our website at TWIS.org. We hope you subscribe. All right, I've got a spark. Just a little spark of science, everyone, to start the show. So Justin, a couple of weeks ago, you had an update about the National Ignition Facility laser fusion facility that had reached a new threshold. They were very excited about the amount of fusion that they had created, right?
Yeah. It lasted for an nth of a percentage of an nth of a second, but it was like the biggest outcome they'd had yet.
So this week, I have a story that is fusion related, not lasers, but magnets. So one of the other ways that researchers are trying to create fusion is in the form of tokamaks, these kind of donut-shaped rings that are wrapped in magnets, and they use massive electromagnetic fields to contain plasma. So they shunt a bunch of energy into the coils of the magnets. That starts a current flowing, and you get a plasma that can be contained on the inside. And if a high enough magnetic field is reached, it's possible for that plasma to actually hit fusion, to actually reach a point of fusion. But they've been reaching for certain thresholds, just like the National Ignition Facility, and MIT and a startup company that they have been working with called the Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Just this week, they reported ramping up a new model for their magnets. It's not actually the tokamak yet, but what they have done is they've taken advantage of new ribbon-like high-temperature superconductors. So there's another magnetic tokamak kind of fusion project that's over in Europe called ITER. It uses low-temperature superconductors. This is newer high-temperature superconductors, so they don't have to reduce the temperature of the whole system quite as far to get to the point of superconducting.
Yeah, that's such a pain, because it's not always like, here's all this complicated stuff that we have to pull off. Oh, and we have to be as close to zero as we possibly can.
Right, it has to be basically the dead of space.
Yeah, so then how big can you even try to make a thing? You then have to okay, so that's a huge limiting factor they've potentially been able to remove.
Absolutely. And so what they reported with these new magnets designed using these high temperature superconducting ribbons, and it really is, it's like a thin ribbon like you'd wrap your hair in if you were making a bow. And they've created these magnets and were able to reach a 20 Tesla magnetic field in their
That's a lot of cars.
Oh,
no, wait, what is it?
Teslas are measures of magnetic force, and this is the largest, the highest magnetic field that we have created using these superconductors to date. So this is proof of concept that their magnets work, and they have the magnetic power that should be necessary to get their project to work. And their project is called Spark, and it will be using a number of these different magnets to be able to wrap the donut and to make the electromagnetic magnetic field go all the way around and eventually contain plasma and actually create a fusion field. So they have 16 submagnets that are stacked up inside a case, and that's what they tested now. Those they were able to show they could replicate the 20 Teslas near absolute zero, but not as close to absolute zero as they would have to if they were a low temperature superconductor. And they were able to show that it absolutely works. They're going to take all of these magnets now and put them together into the tokamak, and it's going to be a compact design because of the fact they're using the high temperature superconductors. It allows the magnets to actually be smaller. And so the eventual fusion reactor will be much smaller and potentially something that could produce a lot of energy. And they're hoping they're going to be producing energy as soon as 2025.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Nice.
Their goal. It's 2021 now. And their goal is
Yeah, I don't know about that.
2025. But they're on schedule. They are on schedule.
But I mean, like, they already have everything in place other than this higher capacity, right? So they're swapping components at this point. They're not like starting from scratch.
No, yeah, that's exactly the concept. They are using all old ideas for building the tokamak. The new idea is the high temperature superconducting magnets. And so using these magnets, they can scale down the design and hopefully reach the amount of electromagnetic force that they actually need.
So they don't have to reinvent the DeLorean. They just need to slap the flux capacitor on it.
Exactly. It's like, let's take the DeLorean and put a flux capacitor. You've got it. Exactly.
Okay. Nice.
I love that it's 16 magnets. Not 15, not 20.
16.
16.
16.
It's
going to take 16. That's just what it is. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's good timing for all of this because just, other things in the news this week to kind of put us in the sense of why we need to be pushing forward on fusion and taking ourselves off of fossil fuels. A study out this week suggests that the economic cost of climate change could be 6 times higher than previously thought. And basically that things are going to cost a lot of money and we're going to lose a lot of money. And it's not going to be as hunky-dory economically as a lot of economists have been kind of hoping it would be. And additionally, researchers published a study suggesting that we need to leave at least 60% of the remaining fossil fuels that are in the ground. 90% of coal needs to stay in the ground for us to be able to stay at that 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius warming that we are targeted at this point in time. And in order to do these things, we need to get off of fossil fuels, and fusion energy is one possible way to do that.
Ultimately, we just got to slap the coal and the fossil fuels out of people's hands.
Tokamak! 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 I'm like, I want this cheer. I want us all cheering for the tokamaks. We're getting there.
Yeah, the other thing that is also important statistically to point out about economists is that 90%, they're 90% right when they say the economy is going to get better. Because over time, the economy increases 90% of the time. It just gets better, like every year. So it's kind of an easy job. Like it's like predicting
so
sunshine
far it has been.
in the California summer. But the real trick is whether or not they can actually predict or just hope or play the odds. Anyway, can I move my story? I'm gonna move my last story up to my first story because the story you just told is perfect to add the good news. Just good news.
No, you're going to ruin it.
We get to start off with good news. I'm so excited.
This is the segment that dares to take on some of the most horrific, unbearable, and overwhelmingly terrible topics, the kind that too often make us kind of feel hopelessly nihilistic about humanity's chances for survival in the future, and finds the good news story about them this week. So it's time for Just Good News, Global Warming Edition. Orca is the name of a new direct air capture and storage plant in Iceland. So direct air capture systems, what they do is they move air through the thing. It takes the carbon dioxide out of the air, and then it therefore reduces the amount of that greenhouse gas that is in the atmosphere. The Orca plant, and you should go Google this somewhere because it's pretty fascinating looking plant. The Orca plant uses a carbon capture technology to take the CO2 out of the air, mixes it with some water, sequesters it deep underground, or it can also recycle it. The system has these huge fans. They're on these modules that look like shipping containers with just sort of fans on the sides of them. And so those move the air through. They have carbon dioxide filters inside that filter the material inside the collector. Once the filters are full, the collector closes and it heats up to like 100 degrees Celsius. Like it's super, super hot. This sort of rarefied high concentration carbon dioxide is then schlepped off because of the heat. And it mixes with groundwater and then can get stored. At least in the case of Orca, I think they're doing a deep underground storage where apparently over time it hardens and becomes like stone underneath the ground. and is never heard from again. So the Orca system will capture 4,000 tons of CO2 per year, making it the world's biggest climate cleaning facility ever built. And it's already making a huge, significant step. I think it actually technically opened today. It went online. Making a huge step in counteracting CO2 pollution generated by people everywhere. So 4,000 tons of CO2 a year, that's approximately the same as the emissions of 870 cars or 533 average U.S. homes. And it's sort of like people are like, well, why would they put it in Iceland? Because Iceland is sort of a strange location. It's sort of known for having pretty decent air quality. You know, it's out there in the middle of the ocean. It doesn't have a whole lot of
But it has hydroelectric.
pollution.
It has hydrothermal power. So
Yeah, it's such a green place to
Yeah.
begin with. Like, why would you put it there? Well, that's exactly right, Kiki. You nailed it. It's running off of the hydroelectric. It's using geothermal heat to do that rapid heat increase for the schlepping off of the carbon on these filters. But yeah, you feel like you should put that in like Los Angeles or something, or someplace with a lot of cars, you know, or someplace like in the Central Valley, the fires. We could just put those everywhere here in the fires. But yeah, the estimates for the amount of sequestration studies indicate that by mid-century, this century, 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide will need to be removed from the air every year to keep much of the Earth habitable. So we're going to need a few more of these by
Just a few more.
mid-century.
Yeah.
powered by Tokamax. Tokamax.
Okay, powered by-
Tokamax.
So if you do the 4 billion, hang on a second, 4 billion divided by 4,000
It's a lot.
carbon. So we need 2.5 million of these in the next 30 years. So-
Yeah, so not a
Just a
reset
couple.
button is your point.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't fix the problem. It is
Yeah,
an
so-
and, not an or.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
so
so
that-
many solutions, right, Blair?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
but
good
it's,
news.
But it's great news.
So
That's fantastic. Let's
Yeah,
people,
it's
we
good.
can do these things. We can
That's
make these
just-
things happen.
Well, and
That's
like, remember
not
the
great.
first solar panels? The first solar
Good.
panels were like kind of garbage, right? So maybe this will breed innovation within this same technology,
Yes.
and it will get more compact and more efficient over time. And as long as we survive long enough and are able to stop using carbon now, maybe eventually we can get to a point where we can start pulling it out at a reasonable scale. That would be great.
I love it.
So
Yes, please.
yeah,
I love it.
Powering these things by the tokamak generated energy, fusion energies, and the other energies because that's really what it all has to come down to, right?
Mhm.
Eventually, is an energy source that we can use to heal the planet that isn't destroying the planet twice as fast as we can heal it.
Yep.
Solar is good too.
Let's get
Yeah,
there.
a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
So I'm a huge fan of solar. Like, I can't still understand why there aren't wide swaths of the country just covered in municipal solar power plants.
But how do you know if things are working? Like, what if an installation goes wrong? Like
Huh?
a transplant, Blair.
I thought you were going there. Yeah, so I love this story. So something that you may not know unless you are the recipient of a lung transplant is about 50% of lung transplant patients are diagnosed with chronic allograft dysfunction or chronic rejection within 5 years of the transplant. Basically, a lung transplant is a Hail Mary that ultimately seems like it only works about half the time. So that sucks. And if you could know if a transplant was going to fail, if it was going to be rejected, currently that is the most important cause of death after lung transplant. Not a surprise. And there's really no good treatment available other than trying again, doing a retransplantation. If you figure it out in time, you can potentially save somebody, or at the very least buy some extra time, some extra years, if you know that the lung is failing. And the sooner you know that, the better chance people have of surviving. So the problem is, how do you assess the success of a lung transplant? Can you predict or diagnose if they are going bad? Yes, Justin.
If the patient survives.
Yes.
is how I would determine success.
Yes, and currently that's basically what we have. So it takes several months to diagnose if a lung transplant is going to be rejected. They test lung function at each visit. They measure it against peak lung function. Then if it drops below 80%, they need to investigate further. They need to look at potential treatments, see how they respond to antibiotics. There's all these kind of long list of things that doctors have to do to go, are you sick or is your transplant failing? And so enter the e-nose. It's an electronic nose that can detect with 86% accuracy if a lung transplant is beginning to fail. This is coming out of the Netherlands at Erasmus University Medical Center in Rotterdam. Rotterdam. It's got to be more complicated a pronunciation than that. Yeah, go ahead.
So then there is a cue in your exhalant.
Yes.
You're exhaling your breath. I should just say the regular word I could find. Breath.
Yeah.
that has signal. That has a molecular change. Or what are they looking for in this thing that's signaling? I know that's where you're going, but I'm...
yeah, absolutely. So the e-nose hat is this small device you breathe into. It has sensors that detect chemicals called volatile organic compounds, VOCs. They're present in about 1% of our exhaled breath, and it varies depending on metabolic processes in our body, including the processes going on in the lungs. And so when patients breathe out into the e-nose, the sensors not only detect the pattern of the volatile organic compounds in the breath, but also the results are taken into account in relation to the ambient air in the room. Then they take that information and then they can compare the e-nose e-nose readings at each visit, and then they can kind of follow progress. And so in 86% of cases, researchers found that the e-nose was able to discriminate between this 68 patient sample size of whose lung transplants were stable and whose were not. So it seems like a very good, non-invasive, early clue to potential lung transplant failure. And of course, this was 68 people. This was not yet a clinical trial. This is really a proof of concept, and it looks really good. It looks really good. If we can breathalyze people, if there's other things that we're exhaling that can give clues to our physical health, that's great.
I am all about this kind of technology where if whatever metabolites are coming out in my breath, even just a drop of blood every once in a while, I'd be happy to do that as well. Just, these sensors that can pick up the oddities, the things that aren't quite right. And that, yes, more of them.
Yeah, and it's Star Trek Day, as we discussed at the very beginning.
Perfect for Star Trek Day.
This is exactly there are breathalyzers you can plug into your smartphone. So this is something that, this is way far in the future, but I don't think it's sci-fi. I think this is something that we will see. It's something that you can breathe into on your smart device that can help track. It's not going to take the place of a doctor, but if it's, for example, if you are a lung transplant patient, you could do this daily and that information could get sent to your doctor, right? So
for sure. There's no, why would you have to drive? Yeah. Why do you have to go places? The technology can be with you whenever you need it.
Yeah.
Yes. So I love the uninvasiveness of this.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge superpower. But I also, as you're talking about, initially, how do you separate the noise from, what's just? Can you imagine, right now, with all the wildfires and everything, all the particulate matter in the air? If you've had a lung transplant and no way of really testing it, and you're having trouble breathing, it could be what's affecting everybody, or it could be your lung surgery is going awry, and you're not really have a way to decipher. That would be terrifying. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this thing needs to get developed and out there, available to physicians, patients, even everywhere.
Yeah.
And 86% success is, that's
not bad at all.
Not bad.
It's very good considering there's not really anything else that can
do it.
Can do it at this stage of the transplant, right? Which is really like you're working, it's not like the more invasive version is 95% effective. We got nothing. So, so it's pretty great.
And it's really like, it's actually like that for like, if you've ever, like we've all done at some point, done the dumb thing where we have like a fever and some nausea and maybe a joint ache, and we've gone to one of those diagnostics online, or maybe you had the little medical diagnosis book at home kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And like it's all noise because it's all like the same symptoms and it's the same thing. Like how do you tell?
You have cancer, you're
how
dying.
to differentiate anything. So any tool out there that can separate away a bunch of noise from an actual thing that's taking place is huge.
So very, very huge. Speaking of noise in the system, I'm sticking to the climate change the climate change news tip for this story. And I just want you to know that animals out in the world are adapting to climate change by shape-shifting. They're shapeshifters. Well, not real shapeshifters, but some new research looked at a few of the ways that different animal species adapt to rising temperatures by changing the size of their ears, their tails, their beaks, their legs, even. Various appendages often change size to allow for heat loss so that species that are getting hotter in higher temperature climates can actually manage their temperatures more readily. So they identified a bunch of different examples that they call shapeshifters, including many species in Australia. And they found that a pattern is very, very, very widespread and that we might see fundamental changes to animal forms as a result of climate change. So we're going to find that some animals, like elephants, African elephants, they pump warm blood into their ears to help with some of that heat dispersion. What if their ears keep getting bigger? Beaks of birds have similar functions, and they actually found that, yes, indeed, bird beaks are getting larger. They looked at many species of Australian parrots, and they found that the beak size of gang cockatoos and red-rumped parrots increased between 4% and 10% over about the last 150 years. So there's quite a variety, a divergence between different species, probably species limitations being part of that, and also other ecological factors. But that's one of the big questions now is which species are actually going to be able to adapt and change the size of their appendages, and what factors in their environments are going to keep them limited, that are going to potentially make them easier to spot by predators, that are going to change their ability to find a mate and reproduce. How are these adaptations going to change the animals moving forwards?
Won't those adaptations not make it very far? I mean, because we're talking generational changes.
Right. These are generational changes. These are adaptations that are fully within the purview of the genetic structure of the animals as they are to grow, is kind of like what we've seen Darwin's finches in the Galapagos do over several generations. We've seen beak sizes on several different species go bigger and smaller, bird size get bigger and smaller, and those birds
Mammals
are still
are
the same
shrinking.
species. Yeah, they're still the same species. They're just changing within their changeability factors.
So does this mean humans of the future will have much bigger ears?
Right. Are our ears going to get bigger?
No, man, we have air conditioning. Don't worry about it.
We're just going to have better insulative clothing in the winter, better heat-wicking clothing in the summer, and better air conditioning.
Well,
And
also, our sexual
Tokamax.
selection is, like, all over the place, and we have pharmaceutical care. So, like, this we've really thrown evolution out of whack for humans, at least.
At least with respect to how we adapt according to these climactic factors, right?
Yeah.
So we're not going to potentially change in the same way, but we will definitely change technologically because that is our adaptation at this point in time. But
Or
yeah,
as the economists might say, survival of the richest.
Yes, unfortunately. Ouch. And so anyway, the researchers think, based on their study, that there are predictions that they can make about which species might be able to survive over other species, based on a variety of factors. So they're expecting that starlings, song sparrows, seabirds, small mammals are likely to change appendage sizes in response to increasing temperatures. And we may see more of this as more researchers start looking for it. And so keep your eyes out for little rodents with larger ears. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Could be climate change. Do you have another story here, Justin?
Oh, goodness, yes. NASA's Perseverance Mars rover has started its rock collection. I've got it, the space agency tweeted, alongside a photograph of a rock core slightly thicker than a pencil inside a sample tube. I've got it. NASA, that's your tag. I've got it. Not rock on. Not Perseverance pays off or NASA was a rolling stone. None of that. You went with, I've got it. Okay, you don't need me to tell you how to build a rover. Obviously, you've got that figured out. But you really should hire someone for these press releases. Someone who I can give you options. Even if they're not great, maybe a little bit off brand, would still be better than what you came up with. But if you like being boring, say so. In fact, there you go. Another boring day on Mars. See, it's that easy, NASA. Just put a little bit of effort into it. But no, I've got it. All right, the sample was collected on the 1st of the month, just over a week ago. But NASA was initially not sure that they'd actually collected it because they couldn't get a decent picture of the little containment portion that they've got there. They took pictures, but the lighting was bad or something. They just couldn't tell what they had. So they finally got the lighting right. They took a few more photos, and they could verify that in the transfer tube, they had their sample. And they actually took it not down to the ground. They found a rock and drilled into it. So they have an actual rock core in there. Thomas Zurbuchen, Associate Administrator of Science, likened the achievement to the first samples of rock taken from the moon, which are still being studied by researchers today. Perseverance's sampling and catching system, they're saying, is the most complex mechanism ever sent to space, because just that capturing system alone contains over 3,000 parts. Right now it's collecting rocks. It's got about 8 more rock samples it's going to be collecting. And once it sort of finishes that, it's going to move to a different region in the crater that is thought to be much more rich in clay minerals, where it will take many, many, many more samples. This is the one that's actually maybe the more interesting. It's interesting that they're starting with the rock and then moving on to the clay samples. I would have thought of doing it the other way around. Cut the easy thing first, be gentle with the blade, but maybe you don't want to dull when you cut the rocks. I don't know. But they're going to the clay second. But that's the one that's got most likely the higher chance of finding signals of life on the foreign planet. At least if it's anything like Earth, that's where a lot of our mineral and fossil deposits from life sort of build up over time, is in that sort of clay. So, but yeah, and then joint mission with the European Space Agency sometime in the 2030s. He's going to try to collect those samples and send them back to Earth. At which point, NASA scientists will exclaim, "I've got it!"
No,
I hope they do.
Your package has been delivered.
They'll get a text.
Yeah.
Your package is delivered.
On your
got it.
porch.
You got it.
Come on. Try harder.
All right. How about we take a listen to this little snippet of biology? What do you hear when you hear this?
What is it?
That sounds.
It sounds like me losing all sleep this evening, is what it sounds like. It's terrible.
No. Hang on. That sounds like a duck dressed like a human trying to order fish at a barn or Red Lobster.
Well, it was a loud recording. There's a bunch of noise in it. But did you hear somebody saying, "You bloody fool? You bloody fool"?
No.
You didn't hear somebody saying, "You bloody fool"?
It sounded like human speech, but it sounded like gibberish to me.
You'd have to prime me with it. Now play it.
Okay,
So if you play it now,
if I play it now, do you hear "You bloody fool"?
Oh, I heard it that time. Ooh, I heard it that time. I heard it that time.
You bloody fool.
Now I can hear it.
So there's a researcher, Carl Tenkate, and he is at Leiden University, and he's been working on a book about vocal learning and birds. And in researching for the book, he was going around and heard a tale of a duck had learned to say, "You bloody fool," because it was hand-reared.
I could hear the duck accent.
the duck accent. Yes,
I could hear the duck accent. I didn't
the
realize it was a
really
British
gets in
duck.
the way of the hard B's, you know.
I couldn't.
Yeah. So it was an Australian rearing. So it was more of an Australian accent of a duck that is known as a musk duck. Now, the surprising thing about this is that ducks are not supposed to have vocal learning. And this is a recording that's 34 years old that was taken and put into some biological library. And this researcher from Leiden University went and listened to it and tracked down the story. And yes, indeed, discovered that this duck had, for whatever reason, been turned into a wildlife rehabilitation location, and was hand reared by a person, not by another duck. And in this odd situation in which a musk duck had never found itself before, instead of just going mack 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 like other ducks, it said, "You bloody fool." And what this implies, like some other species that we never thought were vocal learners, because the sounds that they make when they vocalize are not necessarily the kinds of sounds that you have to go through a learning process to practice and learn from somebody else. And they sound so similar to other conspecifics, other individuals of their species. We just think they don't learn these things. But apparently these musk ducks, they have a very long juvenile development period where they're taken care of by their parents for an extended period, fed by their parents, by the mother, which is very unusual in ducks. Very, very often water birds are very precocial. And so this duck, this individual recording, we haven't seen the duck because it's probably long gone by now, but it's a very interesting happenstance to give us insight into a species and as to something that, yes, Blair, we didn't think that they did because we just never saw it happen. And
show me a second duck. Show me a second duck. Show me a duck alive today. Recreate the thing. I feel like
that's what has to happen.
I feel like this recording at the university, like every first year biology student or whatever, or somebody in their first year of trying to go after a doctorate or something, the university is like, you know a mystery that's never been solved. Oh, you mean the talking duck? What you guys are kidding me? Like, no, really. If you go look in the file, somebody should look into that again one day. And then some student, after several weeks of listening to the recording of "You Bloody Fool," finally goes, "Oh, I get it."
I'm a bloody fool.
I'm a bloody fool. Falling for this.
That's what I was going to say too. I want the videotape.
Right?
And then
No videotape, just the audio tape.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just, I totally believe other animals are capable of vocal learning. That seems silly that anyone would say they're not. However, this is a sound I have never heard from a duck before.
Exactly.
It's very like breathy. The fact that it sounded like they were making like a B and an L sound, and their tongue is like stuck to their beak.
I got a talking duck here. Should we film it and do some audio? No, I think the audio enough would be fine. It's a talking duck. If people hear it, that should convince them. Like, how is that? How did you not? That never no, really, it's a talking duck. We should.
I need the receipt.
Nah, just give me an audio tape of it. It'll be fine. It's just making a noise. Everyone knows what a duck looks like. That's not exciting. Yeah, stop it.
Yeah, I
remain skeptical.
Receipts.
I remain skeptical. Yeah.
Remaining skeptical is very good. What we know now is this is a singular situation. And if other individuals find themselves in the care of a musk duck, then perhaps you too can teach the young duck to say, "You
if you're in the care of
also,
a musk duck, something really bad happened in life."
One duck species? No. Ducks are really closely related, and their evolutionary divergence is not that long ago. So, do with all the ducks. Find another duck that can do this. It can't just be the musk duck. I don't believe that.
Right. So you'll have to find a species that maybe has a very different, interesting communication pattern, like the musk duck, that has a longer developmental period where it's being taken care of by its parents. Maybe there's a different social structure than other ducks. I mean, these are the kinds of things that biologists and behaviorists really have to start looking at and teasing apart to see how it works. Comparative studies, and these kinds of hand rearing studies where they're separated from their normal environment to give us that idea. But
I have a feeling that we just fell for a 50-year-old snipe hunt.
It might not be a snipe hunt. It's a musk duck hunt.
Mm-hmm.
You bloody fool. And on that note, thank you for being a part of This Week in Science this week. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you are enjoying the show, please take the time to share the show with a friend. We'd really appreciate it if you could tell somebody about TWIS today. All right, let's come on back with some COVID update.
No. I have an update. It's not good.
No, it's not good. Nope, numbers are up, and we're acting like we're all back in business, everybody. COVID-19 cases are climbing in children, increasing 10% over the last week, transitioning between August and September, to make up 26% of all cases. Over 250,000 out of nearly 1 million cases in just 1 week were children. There were 750,000 pediatric COVID cases in the month of August alone. This is the largest jump in child COVID numbers since the start of the pandemic, and school has just begun. Thankfully, although numbers have increased in the hospitals, we are not seeing a large increase in the number of deaths as a result of COVID. And one of the reasons why this might be is the fact that kids don't have an as active and adaptive immune system as they have an active innate immune system. The adaptive immune system is kind of what gets adults in trouble when it comes to COVID-19. It's the antibody responses. It's all of the T cells and B cells and other protective cells that all come into activation because they kind of recognize the coronavirus factor of SARS-CoV-2 that overactivate against things causing a lot of inflammation. And researchers are hypothesizing at this point that one of the reasons that we may not have seen such terrible results in kids as we have seen in adults could be because of this difference in how the child adaptive immune system works as compared to the innate immune system. So this is a good thing. So let's keep the kids out of the hospitals if we can, everybody.
Eric Knapp in the chat room is asking any news on vaccinating those under 12. So there is likely an emergency use order that's going to be coming out within the next couple of months.
Right.
They're now reacting to what's happening here and trying to accelerate things.
They're trying to accelerate things, but still they don't want to make kids sick. So what happened is the FDA, instead of asking to follow up on clinical trial patients for 2 months, which is what the original clinical trials asked for, they asked for 6 months of follow-up for kids who have been in the clinical trials. And that's why we're not seeing the data come in yet from Pfizer that we need to see come in. And so hopefully Pfizer will be completing that some of those studies for at least the 5 to 12 year range this month in September. That's one of the estimated timetables that we're looking at.
Yes, and then the Fauci, I just heard in an interview where he's expecting that we could see it in October.
Yes,
that could get rolled out that quick. It's not a promise, it's not a guarantee, but
if the data looks good, they'll work it.
there's definitely a problem with not doing it at this point. And you know why? Because
just sending those kids to school, that's an experiment in its own.
Yeah.
I'm so angry about so many things, but mostly it's like you can take a time out. Like, I consider myself to be a rather impulsive person, but I can walk away from society for 8 weeks without a problem.
But society can't walk away from you, Justin. Society wants your taxes. Come on. But along those lines, though, people do want to get vaccinated. People want their kids vaccinated. There's been a ton of stress related to all of this. One thing doctors have said, if you have a child, there is a workaround, but they're asking you to please do not do it, which is that now that the Pfizer vaccine has been approved for 12 and over as a actual vaccine, the Comirnaty.
Yeah.
And I can't remember. Comirnaty can have its off-label uses now that it has been approved. So there are workarounds, but researchers are asking you, for the safety of children, because these trials have not come out, please do not take that workaround unless it's really an emergency.
Wait, what are you saying? I just still don't understand that. Like, what?
Because it's been approved as a medication, as a vaccine, doctors can now prescribe it as off-label uses.
But what would be an off-label?
Even though they're not really supposed to. But
what's an off-label use? I don't even.
It hasn't something that so it would be to use it for a younger age group, for a kid, for a vaccine.
Oh, I see what you. Okay.
So it would be.
For some reason I lost the thread there. Yeah.
Off-label is the prescription is for a certain use. But it's not what it's supposed to be used for. And I'm not going to talk about the other drugs that are doing that right now. So.
I heard it's actually like horses who take it.
Nope.
Find that they have a lot less heartworm when they take the Pfizer vaccine.
No. Right. But we're talking about all this stuff and we're like, oh man, it's so stressful. Everything with the pandemic has been super stressful. But researchers just published a study in PLOS One this week suggesting that just getting the first shot of, a 2-shot Pfizer dose reduced Americans' stress levels. That Americans reported, that people in the United States reported improved mental health after having a vaccine. So
in
your
my
vaccines can help your mental health.
Yeah. My husband getting 1 dose improved my mental health.
Yeah.
He worked at the hospital. So that was perfect. Yeah, I can totally attest to that. There was a huge sense of relief. Like one layer of doom disappeared. Just one layer, but it's helpful.
Yeah. And there were a lot of people who felt that relief this spring. That mental distress peaked in the spring of 2020, but has been improving significantly since then, or at least had been. Thanks to Delta, the Delta variant, we are seeing breakthroughs happen a lot more often. I saw a report this last week published it was a newspaper, so not a journal, but researchers were estimating now that if you're vaccinated, you have a 1 in 5,000 chance of becoming infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, Delta or any other. 1 in 5,000, that's up to you to think about your risk. But what is allowing the Delta variant to do this? It is just really great at reproducing. It gets inside of you and is like, I'm going to be in your cells and use the machinery to their utmost. And so this Delta variant is like just going for it in there. It's going to get in there, replicate, do all it can. But how does it get there in the first place? It has a lot more bifurcated spike proteins on its surface. So its surface is just packed with way more spike proteins. And so there's a lot more for it to come in contact with on the surface of your cells. It's also, as you may have heard, is slipping past a lot of our neutralizing antibodies. So we're seeing a lot more of these breakthroughs happen right now. But it's not completely breaking through for everybody. And the other wonderful thing is that people who do actually have a breakthrough infection are usually not ending up in the hospital. So you may end up sick, stay home, but you hopefully will not end up in the hospital. And you also have a reduced probability of long COVID, which that's pretty good. So it's still, these are all like, you think of the good, you think of the bad. There's a lot of balances now. There's risks. There's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration, but it's not all bad news right now. What else can we do to protect ourselves? Have a good diet.
Yeah, wait. What was that story? I looked at it and I was like, nah. It was like, eat your vegetables, right?
Yeah, eat your vegetables.
So I was like, not worth it.
Yeah, so, it's a correlation, not causation, but looking over 3,886,274 million person months of follow-up of 31,815 COVID-19 cases, they found that people who had better diets and were eating more vegetables were less likely to have gotten COVID-19. And some final good news, if you were infected with COVID-19 and then you got an mRNA vaccine, apparently you might be superhuman. I mean, super immune. Yeah. And there was an NPR report talking to a number of researchers who have been looking into a variety of different questions related to vaccines and infections and how they work. And they don't know if the reverse works as well. So getting vaccinated and then getting COVID if you're superhuman at that point as well. But so far, it looks like those individuals, maybe not all of them even, but people who were infected, then got the mRNA vaccines, you're like covered. Your body's like, coronavirus, what's that? I'm going to recognize them all.
Okay.
They found that people...
can you still be transmissible, though? That's always what it comes down to.
Right. Yeah, that's the big question. But it sounds like no. It sounds like these people are immune and that their bodies recognized SARS-CoV-1. They recognized the MERS virus. They recognized SARS-CoV-2. They recognized other... Yeah, they're recognizing all these coronaviruses and their cells are fighting them off. So... super immunity. But we don't know exactly when that combination works and when it doesn't, like whether you had to be really sick or just kind of sick the first time. There's a lot of questions. So if you have not been vaccinated yet, don't try and get COVID and before you get vaccinated, just go get vaccinated.
Well, you can still get it after. Like you can get vaccinated and then go get it. That's like the safer way to do it. Really, that's what we recommend.
The safer way to live. Speaking of which, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of This Week in Science. And if you are listening now and enjoying the show, I'm going to ask you to please head over to twist.org and click on the Patreon link if you haven't done so before. If you have done so, you can do that too. Click on that Patreon link and maybe update your support if you'd like to give more. Or if you haven't given before, check it out. Our Patreon community allows you to support TWIS in an ongoing monthly fashion at the level of your choosing. $10 and more a month, and you will be thanked by name at the end of the show. And we have lots of fun gifts, stickers and t-shirts and things of that sort. And I do hope that you will consider supporting TWIS and our efforts to bring you science every single week. Thank you for all of your support. We really can't do this without you. All right, I think it's now time to come back to talk about some really great topics. Animals in Blair's Animal Corner.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's animal for her.
What you got, Blair?
Thank you. I can't start without it. So I'll start with dogs. Dogs, they're very discerning. We know this already. They're very good at reading their humans, right?
Yes.
And to kind of follow in the vein from the birds that we were talking about before, here's something that is quote unquote uniquely human. And it is the ability to attribute mental states to oneself and others. What does that mean? That means understanding the motivation behind actions. And so this is a study looking at whether dogs can understand human intentions or whether they are just responding to outcomes. So how do you figure this out? Well, a team of researchers in Germany conducted an experiment looking at how dogs reacted to food rewards when they were withheld intentionally and unintentionally. So this is part of the unable versus unwilling paradigm, which, as far as these researchers know, this is the first time it has been used to investigate dogs. And the unable versus unwilling paradigm is where test subjects react differently to a human experimenter who intentionally, the unwilling condition, or unintentionally, the unable condition, withholds a reward. So do I not treat the dog after doing what I asked them to do because I don't want to, or because I dropped the treat and it fell under the door, right? Does the dog react differently depending on which of those conditions happens? And is it because the dog understands what's going on in my brain, or are they simply acting in response to what's going around them, kind of the result of those intentions? So they looked at 51 dogs. Each of them were tested under 3 conditions. In each condition, the dog was separated from a human by a transparent barrier of large plexiglass, like we've all become very used to in these strange times. The situation was that the experimenter was to feed the dog pieces of dog food through a gap in the barrier. So there was a slit in the middle of this transparent barrier. In the unwilling condition, the experimenter suddenly withdrew the reward through the gap. So they showed it to them and went, oh, never mind, in the barrier, and placed it in front of themselves so the dog couldn't get to it. In the unable, clumsy condition, the experimental brought the reward to the gap, tried to pass it through the gap, but dropped it to where the dog couldn't get it. And then in the unable, blocked condition, the experimenter tried to give the dog a reward, but was unable because the gap in the barrier was blocked or too small. So they kind of went to put their hand through the barrier and didn't make it. In all conditions, the reward remained on the tester's side of the barrier. So no matter what, that dog did not get that poor treat. I'm sure they got plenty of treats later. It's okay. So we would expect, if they understood the motivation behind those actions, that they would show different reactions in the unwilling compared to unable. And that is exactly what they saw. So when dogs waited before approaching the reward, the amount of time they waited was really what they were measuring. The prediction was that if dogs are able to identify why the humans withheld the treat. They would wait longer before approaching the unwilling condition, trying to convince them to give them the treat. If they knew it was a mistake, if it was the unable condition, they might rush to try to help alleviate the situation and get the treat, right? And this is all based on the idea that dogs are trying to perform a task to earn the treat, basically. And so not only did this happen, the dogs waited longer in the unwilling condition than the unable, but they also started offering up more behaviors. They would sit, they would lie down. The idea is they were trying to say, like, no, please, I deserve a treat. And they would stop wagging their tail.
Doing the good things.
Yes. But see, if they dropped it accidentally or it didn't fit through the hole, then they would run over to the other side of the barrier and say, like, hey, that's fine. Hey, do you need help getting that? So the idea is that this does appear to indicate that they can understand the intention behind the action of the humans. Of course, further study is needed because there's a million things that could happen that would cause this changed behavior besides understanding intent. For example, was the trainer's body language different in those cases? Did they respond kind of subconsciously to movement from the dog in a particular way? There's all sorts of things that could have happened. How were they talking to the dog? Did the tone change, right? There's all sorts of things that could happen in this case that could indicate much more behind motivation other than just being able to recognize, like, oh, they wanted to give me that treat, but it didn't work out.
And as much as we like to think that, a trainer is being exactly the same to every single dog, every dog is different. Every trainer is different. Sometimes they just don't get along. Sometimes the trainer might just be like, I'm trying really, but they're not.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely one of those things where I would love to see something like this done with an iPad and a dispenser where the dispenser gets stuck. Then the dog has to, so I would love to be able to take the human idea out of it, but then you're removing intent, right? Then you're just looking at mechanics. So
right. Yeah. It's a different question.
It's really hard. How do you test human intent without humans? So I think you have to kind of then parse out, like, maybe can we map their brain while they're doing this? The human and the dog. It would get crazy to try to figure this out, but I'm sure I look forward to seeing those crazy studies where they actually try to get to the bottom of this.
We need to have our human synthetes, our androids that always do everything the same. The dogs will never know.
Yeah, perhaps. But yes, it did make me feel a little bit better because I don't know if any of you have ever stepped on a dog's foot.
Oh.
But they make a sound and you want to go curl up in the corner and die. You feel so bad. You're like, I didn't mean to. But like, if they understand intent, then they know it's a mistake, which makes me feel so much better. So I'm hoping that's the implication here, is that a dog knows when you step on their tootsies accidentally. That's my fingers crossed, but we'll see.
Cats may or may not understand intent, but they sure know that they know how to take it out on you.
Yeah, I think
no matter what.
Not only do they know intent, but they also don't care.
You stepped on my tail, and they run away, hiss and run, and then they go pee on your laundry. It's great.
Great. So from that, I would like to move to extremely clumsy flying lizards.
Okay.
This is a study from UC Berkeley, and this is the culmination of 15 years of flying gecko research. This is UC Berkeley. Oh, and also more recently, it was brought to Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems in Stuttgart, Germany. That actually is one of my favorite parts of the story, is when it moved to Max Planck. So sit tight. But they wanted to look at how geckos use their tails to maneuver mid-air. Because, as we know, lots of lizards use the tail to kind of like identify where they're going to go. And kind of like steer in air, make sure they stay right side up. They also use their tail to run across the surface of a pond. They use their tail to propel. They use their tail for balance. But these geckos are using their tail for something else. And so the reason that they discovered this is that they were studying the way that these geckos glide through trees. And they found that in 37 times over their field seasons, over several field seasons in Singapore, these geckos, the Asian flat-tailed house gecko, just bonked their head straight into the tree. Just took a terrible landing. Just absolutely terrible. Went head first. They call it a header in the research. Just fully bonked into the tree. And you would think they would then tumble to the ground. Aha! No. High-speed video cameras recorded their trajectories, and they found that despite the fact they were going about 6 meters a second, or 21 kilometers an hour, or, as Justin would say,
21,000 meters.
Meters an hour. Or,
Fast.
as those people
Way
who
fast.
still do standard would say, over 200 feet per second, or about 120 gecko body lengths per second. That's very fast. They move their head up and down before they take off, side to side, view their landing target. They get really confident, and then they smack right into the tree, have a terrible landing. But then they grab the trunk with their padded toes, their back toes, as their head and shoulders fall backwards. They do this crazy, like, matrix bend. And the leverage of the pressing against their tail allows them to kind of slowly move back up and go right where they meant to go. So they don't fall down kind of head over heels. That tail braces them and allows them to stick to the tree. So really phenomenal, crazy thing that these guys are doing. Something we haven't seen with lizard tails in the past. And it does mean, I think it's worth looking at tails across the animal kingdom now to see who else is doing this. But where this really gets interesting is that they then took it to robots. So there were robots that were 3D printed. They were given tails. Some of them were given no tails. They had Velcro feet. So this is all kind of mimicking the geckos. And they threw them at walls. It was robot catapult. So they were able to toss these things at the wall. This was at the Max Planck Institute.
Toss them at the wall without actually hurting any lizards in the making of their science.
Yeah, so they made this soft robot. It looks kind of like a gecko. They, as I said, they had the Velcro feet. And then the tail was supposed to have kind of the same flexibility and tension as a gecko tail. And so they were able to make this mechanism where it would press downward when the front legs hit a surface, like the gecko's tail reflex. So the robot had a similar success as the gecko. They had a pretty good time. So in the wild, 87% of the geckos with tails successfully landed on a vertical surface. Why do I say with tails? Because all lizards...
Sometimes they lose their tails.
Yeah. Or most lizards, I guess. There's a few exceptions. But most lizards can lose their tail. So when they did not have tails, the tailless geckos fell a lot more frequently. Tailless robots, they did pretty terribly. They only were able to land successfully on a vertical surface in 15% of trials. And the real geckos had an 87% success. The robots had a 55% success. Not having a brain, pretty good. Not bad at all. And so
that's a lot of just biology there, or at least
yeah.
biology-inspired engineering, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so one of the things I really liked about this was that the researchers mentioned, like, tails are a pretty important part of a body. And so when we're designing robots, if we're trying to mimic animal movement, quadrupedal movement, climbing, crawling, the tail actually is kind of important. Until recently, it hasn't been considered as important as legs or wings, but some animals actually could potentially be recategorized as pentapedal, needing that fifth appendage for locomotion.
Right.
If
So
it really...
This
Yeah, go
isn't
ahead.
locomotion. This is
No,
not
but-
falling off of trees.
Yeah, so I was
it's
literally...
aerial movement.
It is.
I was literally just observing this in my backyard the other day because I've got this tree with some sort of little berries or something that's in the tree. I'm not even sure what kind of tree it is. But the squirrels have been in my tree, and they've been at work. They've been getting these little husks off and eating this little nut or whatever the thing is. And they've been really busy up there. And they've been going out on the extremities of these branches. And I was watching, and it was that tail was completely, while the arms, it's bent forward on a tiny branch, leaning forward and working with its hands. And that tail is articulating to counterbalance the entire time. And I noticed, squirrels also have bigger butts than I thought they did. But they have, but their weight distribution, along with that tail, is designed exactly for that, to allow them to perch in otherwise an insanely precarious way that they wouldn't be able to do without it.
Yeah, absolutely. So not only just studying animals, keeping in mind if their tail is a really important part of what they do, but next step when you're making robots, it's something to consider. If you're making a quadrupedal robot, does it need a tail? It's not just for flash, although it would look fabulous. But it might have some good function when you want to take that thing for a ride.
And if you are enjoying This Week in Science, you can ask yourself, do you need a tail? Or do you need a towel? If you need a towel, you can head over to our Zazzle store, go over to twist.org and click on that Zazzle link. It'll take you to our Zazzle store where there are a number of wonderful products that have been put together by Blair with Blair's Animal Corner, calendar art. We've got mugs and pillows and towels. You can get a beach towel with the TWIS logo emblazoned all over it. It's a fantastic towel. End of summer, I got to tell you. Or if you're in Australia, summer's coming. Maybe that towel will be timely. Head over to Zazzle and give our merchandise a look.
But make sure you have to down 2 pints. Otherwise, even with a towel, you'll be in trouble.
In trouble. All right, Justin.
Oh,
What's just in?
That's a great question. Okay, so there's a peer-reviewed medical journal, JAMA, and they have JAMA Pediatrics is part of their portfolio. Published study this week titled Police Exposures in the Health and Well-Being of Black Youth in the U.S. What it found was shocking, unless you are black in America, in which case it was probably just pointing out things you already knew. Systematic review of 29 studies that included 19,954 participants. Looked at police exposure, and they found it was associated with multiple health outcomes for black youth specifically, including adverse mental health, risk behaviors, as well as impaired safety, concluding that police exposure should be considered a critical determinant of health. So it's a pretty comprehensive thing because this is one of those studies where they looked at other studies. This is 29 different studies in all, 20,000 participants. So they went through a lot of stuff, but some of the findings that kind of stuck out, at least for me, there was 15,967 youth treated for legal intervention injuries in California hospitals over a 12-year period. The overall rate of injury was 11.9 per 100,000 person years. Black boys aged 15 to 19 years old had the highest rate. They were at 200.9 per 100,000. Now remember, the overall rate was 11.9. But if you happen to be black, it was 200.9. White boys were also up there above that average at 57.7. Girls were much lower, although if you were a black girl the same age as the white girls in the 15 to 19 range, you were 4.3 times more likely to have an injury at the hands of police. The relative inequalities between black and white youth were even greater at the younger ages. Ages 10 to 14, black boys had 5.3 times the injury rate of white boys, and black girls had 6.7 times the injury rate of white girls. And out of everything, race seemed to be determining factor. The rate amongst black girls actually was higher than all other groups except for the black boys. So they actually, the rate at which they were injured was higher. So I misspoke before that the girls were much lower. So what the study seems to be indicating is that there's enhanced violence towards children that is being permitted, I guess, or practiced at least, by police departments towards specifically children of color. This is like sort of the definition of institutional racism. When you take an institution and you look at its data. We were talking about removing the human being sort of from the experiment. Well, in a way, when you look at large data sets, you don't have to concern yourself with the individual or the instance or the particular of a specific, what was the tonality involved? What was the circumstance? When you're looking at massive amounts of data, 20,000 individuals over a 12-year span, and you see these massive trends and these massive disparities. I mean, honestly, I think the numbers are all too high, probably in all of the categories, but the disparate amount means that there seems to be there is excessive violence being acted on children of color in the state of California, which considers itself to be, thinks of itself as being more progressive of a state. So imagine what the data is in states where they're not
in other states
imagining that.
Yeah, and I think, there's two pieces to this too, just kind of on the trying to inject some action and solutions into this, is there's demanding better of those institutions. Obviously, that's the given. But I think on top of that, knowing these numbers, then if you are a white individual and you see a person of color being treated poorly by law enforcement, your chances of being hurt by that law enforcement is pretty damn low compared to that other person. So it's also a good reminder that intervening is always helpful.
Wait. Hang on, let me clarify. So, you're saying if a police officer is getting physical with somebody, you should video it, say something,
say something,
intervene.
Say for it to stop, call for help, all of the above. Absolutely.
I think the most important thing is if we can use this kind of information. I mean, yes, we all have a place to, if we see something, to say something. But if it's not just that, it's also using this kind of information, working within public health systems, working within the institution of policing to try and teach new methods, to try and change the institutions, to try and make sure that these negative interactions between police and youth of color don't happen, or at least don't happen as often, so that the negative ramifications to mental health, to physical health, to later, ability to thrive in life is not negatively affected. We need to change. This needs to be institutionalized. The understanding that there is a big problem and it needs to be acted on.
Yeah, and then one of the other things that always also occurs to me in any of these sort of conversations is housing. If you are in a suburban white neighborhood and your parents are at work and your friends come over, you're hanging out in the backyard. If you're roughhousing with each other, if you're doing a little things, whatever the kids do sometimes these days, you're on private property behind a fence and you're not seen. If you're lower income anywhere in this state, you're not going to go home. You're going to be out in public spaces doing the exact same behavior.
Right.
But now you're exposed.
Yep.
But you're exposed to police presence. So what really needs to get educated is that it's not the jobs of the police necessarily to be using the full force of their training when
On
youth
children?
are involved. Period.
Yeah.
Period. Like, let them get away with their thing that they're doing. It's not worth it for society for you to send a child to the hospital.
Yeah.
Ever.
And we also need to
Ever.
question where police are interacting with children and why that's happening in the first place, so that that can potentially be changed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's important. What's the next one, Justin? You got one more?
Oh, yeah, so this is interesting too. Researchers have developed an artificial cell-like structure out of inorganic matter that can autonomously ingest, chemically process, and push out a material. Basically, that's like one of the essential functions of a living cell. It can metabolize a thing. Well, sort of. So, this is published
the ATP involved, probably.
Is not, yeah.
Yeah.
The article is published in Nature, and it's a thing that they're calling cell mimics. And they've actually sort of proposed a range of things that this might be able to do. So, this is New York University and University of Chicago describing, they have this fully synthetic cell mimic that when deployed in mixtures of different particles, the cell can perform an active transport task. So it can autonomously go in there, capture certain molecules that are in this, chemicals that are in the solution. Then when it's inside, it concentrates it, stores it there. And then it can expel the material later, so depending on also what's inside it, there can be a chemical process that takes place that can transform the chemical that they're taking inside. And so when they expel it, it has been changed in some way. Reversely, it can also go into a mixture with a molecule inside and be coaxed to express it and then add it to the environment. So they created this spherical membrane. It's about the size of a red blood cell. This is super tiny. They've got this polymer on the outside. They pierced a microscopic hole in the spherical membrane. So there's this little channel that matter can be exchanged with. So in order to perform the task right, you would normally need, in a living cell, you would have ATP or mitochondria. You'd have some sort of energy for an active transport. In this cell mimic, researchers have this chemically reactive component inside the nanochannel itself that is triggered by light. So you have to add a little bit of energy to it. And then when you've activated it with the light, it acts like a pump. When the light hits the pump, it triggers the chemical reaction, turning the pump into a tiny vacuum, pulling cargo into the membrane or expelling it out again. So some of the things that they're thinking they might be able to do is, what are the cool things? They grabbed E. coli. They sent it out and were sucking up E. coli bacteria with this thing. So they could grab the little bacteria, and then, then you could pull out these little cell
mimics. That would be great. Yeah. Can we put that on my kitchen counter? I don't know. Can we use this for environmental cleanup?
Yeah, so this could be, you could use this inside the human body is what they're even saying.
Oh, wow.
So you could use this to, like you've had an infectious pussy something. You could sort of put these in there and they could try to suck up all the E. coli or whatever the infection is. So they also they think they could use this for water purification, cleaning microscopic pollutants. They think they could possibly use this for drug delivery. So there's a lot of potential for this little Pac-Man, this little slurpy little Pac-Man thing.
You'll look very cool. Little tiny cells. We've eaten things up like Pac-Man. Wacka, 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 wacka. All right, well, I don't have cells right now, but I've got some more animals to end the show with. Okay, all right, I'm going to start with the hummingbirds. We're going to talk about hummingbirds who know the smell of danger.
Dun, 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 dun.
Right. And this is really fun. Out of UC Riverside, the researchers have just published their work in behavioral ecology and sociobiology. Their work looking into the olfactory behavior of hummingbirds, who have been shown in previous studies as pollinators and nectar feeders to remember the locations of flowers that they have fed from and thus pollinated, remove the nectar that they've pollinated. Really great memory for flowers so that they know not to return to a flower that has no nectar in it. I mean, why would you want to do that? But the researchers also were looking at hummingbirds and going, look at that long, skinny beak. Their little tiny heads. They probably can't smell.
Of course they can.
Really. Yeah, exactly, Blair. Of course they can. The researchers, of course, many researchers, they're not seabirds. They don't have giant nares and olfactory bulbs. They're not going to be able to smell these little tiny hummingbirds. Of course they can. And the researchers at UC Riverside who worked with hummingbirds, they showed for the first time that hummingbirds can not only smell insects, but that scents might help them stay out of danger when they're looking for nectar. So say there's a dangerous insect somewhere nearby, or the scent of a predator on some of their plants that they are feeding from. These birds are able to use scent to avoid dangerous situations. They allowed over 100 hummingbirds to choose between sugar water feeders or sugar water plus a chemical. And it was a number of different insect chemicals to signal the presence of an insect. The feeders looked exactly the same because, of course, you can just take hummingbird feeders with the red sugar watery looking feeder, chemical or no chemical. So the only thing that's different is the scent. And they were able to determine that the hummingbirds were able to tell the difference between scent deposited on flowers by European honeybees, attraction chemicals secreted by Argentine ants, and formic acid from some ants, which is known to harm birds in some cases. Formic acid can hurt their little eyeballs. So the hummingbirds are really avoiding formic acid. They avoided both ant chemicals, but they were totally fine with honeybees. They're like, whatever, honeybees, you're awesome. I'm going to ignore you. And they had another compound called ethyl butyrate, which was just a test compound. It's present in human food. And the researchers say it smells like juicy fruit gum, which is not a scent known in nature. And the birds didn't care about it. Birds don't care about juicy fruit gum. So now the question is, we've been looking at hummingbirds, looking at flowers and feeders from the perspective of their visual senses. What role does scent play in their foraging behavior, especially now that we know that birds not only can use it to potentially identify sweeter smelling flowers, if they can also identify these harmful scents that they don't like as well? How does it influence the decisions that they make while they forage?
Very muchly.
Yes, right? A lot. Hummingbirds, they're gonna use their sense of smell. It's fascinating to me. I mean, it's like if you walk up to a place where you want to eat and it smells bad, you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to go now. Thanks.
Yeah. This is just leftover propaganda from when the scientific consensus was that most birds can't smell.
Yeah.
Just leftover.
But look, that little tiny tube mouth with that tongue and little brain, of course they can't smell. Yes, they can.
Of course they can.
Yes, they can, and they use it very well.
Yeah. But we can't worry about what science used to think. Because we've since learned that flowers can hear. Right? There's that crazy story about the sound of bees making this certain flower spike its sugar content in a very rapid way so that it could attempt
those vibrations,
to attract
they like it.
Bees by smell. So bees can smell. Flowers can listen. Now I want to know if the flowers are listening to the hummingbirds.
Ooh.
I want to know if they're spiked, because if the hummingbird can smell and the flower can make a scent and the flowers can hear, you probably got communication
For
that.
sure.
Yep, flying by. And then let's spike the sugar. Let's put the scent out. So let's get the hummingbird over here. So
yeah, let's do it. Has anybody ever wondered where tabby cats got their stripy fur?
From when they used to be lions or tigers or something, I assume. Like, they just shrunk over time. They were big tigers.
But where did the lions and tigers get their stripiness from? Where did their patterns come from? All of these different designs that make our kitty cats so unique and pretty.
From their
they
parents?
Give us the species. What?
From their parents.
From their parents. Well, very good, Blair. Yes, indeed they do. Yes, they do. And in fact, researchers just publishing in Nature Communications this week, Stanford medicine researchers, they have determined that all of these patterns and variability have come from a particular gene. DKK4. DKK4, of course.
That's the stripy gene.
It's a stripy gene.
Why didn't I think of that?
And this gene is active during early embryonic development. And they discovered that there's a thickening of skin tissue in certain areas in fetal cat tissue. And it's like a pre-pattern. And it mimics the patterns that adult cats eventually get in their fur. Thick areas mark patches of fur that are going to be darker, and thin areas mark patches that are going to be lighter. And they call this step establishment. And it happens it's really early in fetal development, way before the hair or the follicles is even going on there. And so the researchers took a look at this pre-patterning and they were like, okay, what are the cells that are involved in this? They looked at the makeup of those cells in the thick and the thin, and they found that DKK4 was really, really active in the thickened areas of skin, but not in the thin areas. And so from that point, they went to Abyssinian cats. They looked at specifically Abyssinian cats, which have blurring colors in their coat that have all sorts of squishy markings, and it's like a bunch of gradations as opposed to very specific lines. And they were able to identify mutations in this DKK4 gene that make it look ticked, that make it look not tabby. So if you remove DKK4, the thicker areas get less thick, but they don't go away altogether. They get smaller and they get more packed together. So what happens with white cats? They're patterned too, but they found that there are two processes that are important here. One that forms the pattern during the embryonic development, the DKK4 that's in there. And then there's another that translates pattern into pigment in the hair follicles. And when you have solid colored cats that aren't striped, you have instructions that produce dark pigment everywhere. And in white cats, you get instructions that override those early patterns and tell it to have no pigment anywhere. And so there's an interaction with these follicular instructions at that second level of development that get rid of the stripes. So all cats at some point in development were striped.
Wow.
All cats at some point in fetal development were headed that direction. They all had markings and stripings and blurls and whorls. But then other instructions came into play, and we have black cats or white cats. Less striped cats.
I still think it's from tigers. They just have to keep looking back. I don't know.
Yeah, let's look at the embryos of tigers and see if that's what it is with cats. I mean,
I would say it's a common ancestor between tigers and cats, actually.
Well, thank you, Blair,
Well,
for that
there's
specification.
animal corner, so
It's
we
very
believe you.
important. It's very important. Yes. But we have come to the end of our show. We have no more stories to share with you this evening. If you have questions about any of these things, you want to comment on any of these stories, we'd love to hear from you. We love your questions. We love answering questions. You can do that. But oh my goodness, we're done, right, friends?
Mm-hmm.
We've done it. We made it to the end. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this. We do hope that you enjoyed the show. I want to shout out to Fada for your help with the social media and the show notes. Thank you to Identity4 for recording the show. And thank you to Gord and Arnlore and all the other wonderful moderators who are helping to keep our chat rooms clean and happy. And also to everyone in the chat for keeping things clean and happy. And thank you to Rachel for your work editing the program. And thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you to Kent Northcote, Rick Loveman, Pierre Velazarb, Ralphie Figueroa, John Rataswamy, Carl Kornfeld, Karen Tozzi, Woody MS, Andre Bassett, Chris Wozniak, Dave Bunn, Vergud Shefstad, Hal Schneider, Donathan Stiles, a.k.a. Don Stylo, John Lee, Ali Coffin, Maddie Perrin, Gaurav Sharma, Shubru, Don Mundus, Stephen Albaran, Daryl Myshak, Stu Pollock, Andrew Swanson, Fredis104, Sky Luke, Paul Ronovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles Jack, Brian Carrington, Matt Bass, Sean and Nina Lamb, John McKee, Greg Riley, Mark Hessenflow, Gene Tellier, Steve Leisman, a.k.a. Zima, Ken Hayes, Howard Tan, Christopher Rappin, Dana Pearson, Richard, Brendan Minish, Johnny Gridley, Kevin Railsback, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Artyom, Greg Briggs, John Atwood, Hey Arizona, support Aaron Lieberman for governor, Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul, Mallory Sutter, Philip Shane, Kurt Larson, Mountain Sloth, Jim DePoe, Sarah Chavez, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Knapp, E.O., Kevin Parachan, Aaron Luthen, Steve DeBell, Bob Calder, Marjorie, Paul Disney, David Summerly, Patrick Pecoraro, Tony Steele, Ulysses Adkins, Brian Condren, and Jason Roberts. Thank you for all of your support on Patreon. And if you would like to support us on Patreon, head over to TWIS and click on the Patreon link. On next week's show,
we will be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific Time, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook channels and from twis.org/live.
Hey, do you want to listen to us as a podcast? Maybe whilst you knit a blanket? Just search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friend to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website, www.twis.org. And you can sign up for our newsletter.
You can also contact us directly. Email Kirsten at KirstenThisWeekInScience.com, Justin at TwistMinion@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at BlairBaz@twist.org. Just be sure to put TWIS, T-W-I-S, in the subject line. Your email will be held just out of reach on the opposite side of a transparent barrier where someone's going to try to pretend to hand it to us, but it's never going to make it.
While you're there, though, if you get bored waiting for the human to offer you the treat, you can just check us out on the Twitter, where we are at TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jacksonfly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes due in the night, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. 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 And this week in science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. Cause it's this week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 Got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This week in science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we said, then please just remember it's all in your head. Cause it's this week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science.